Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Navigating History podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, as always. This is Season 1, Episode 6, on our season on Alexander the Great, the Battle of the Jaxartes River. And before we get into it today, I just want to apologize. I didn't get a podcast out to you last week. I just had a lot of personal stuff going on, but I want you to know there will be a regular scheduled podcast every Sunday from now on. We're back to our regular scheduled programming, so you guys have that to look forward to. I know some of you were asking about it, so I just wanted to clear the air at the start of this podcast and just let you know everything will be back to normal starting this week and for the foreseeable future as well. And in future, if there is an issue, I will post on the Instagram and either on TikTok as well, just to let you guys know, hey, there's no podcast this week. That's something I should have really thought about and say, hey, posted no podcast this week. But there will be new podcasts uploaded from this week onwards. So just want to thank you for your patience and apologize again for not getting a podcast out to you. But let's just jump right into this week. As we were talking about last week, or 2 weeks ago now, I should say, with the Battle of the Persian Gate, Alexander is now staring down the Persian capital of Persepolis, right? He, and you know, his main goal now, because now he's in control of the capital, once he marched to the capital and took control of it, Darius had fled from the capital. So his main goal was to capture Darius and make sure that he was like under control, because again, it could have been a major problem if, even though Alexander was the dominant power in the Achaemenid Empire now and had control over almost all of the entire Persian Empire, he really could have caught Darius, if he'd still been alive, and especially if he'd still been sort of a free man, shall we say, could have definitely caused Alexander problems. So Alexander's number one goal was to capture Darius. In fact, rather than sort of set up his capital and deal with the administrative side of his empire, he focused solely on capturing Darius, because he knew that even if he left Darius alone, even for a month or two to sort of get his affairs in order, it could be really bad, because Darius did have a large force with him, but he realized that a siege would be catastrophic for him, because Alexander had around 50,000 men at this point, and they would have been easily able to surround the city of Persepolis and cut off any supply lines, and eventually just would have waited him out. For example, if Darius had stayed in the capital, they would have just waited him out and sort of just said, all right, I'm going to wait you out, and then we're going to win. Alexander, if you've watched any of the other videos or listened to any of the other episodes on Spotify or any other platform, you know that he has this reputation for, I'm willing to be brutal when I have to be, but I also am willing to be merciful at some points as well. And this was a really tough decision for Darius, because he knew that Persepolis was like a symbol for the Persian for the people of the Achaemenid Empire. It was a symbol to them, right? It was their capital, and this is what this entire campaign is really about: is the symbolism, right? You really have this, as we've talked about before in previous episodes. This idea that the Persians had never lost a battle in their history. They've never lost a battle when their king was present. They'd never lost a battle when their king was present on the battlefield. That is huge. And now, having lost 2 within 5 years at the Battle of Issus and now the Battle of Gaugamela, that is that really shook their confidence. That is something that was extremely damaging for this like almost this mythical image of the Persians. It's one of the reasons why, if you walk down the street, right? If you walk down the street and you asked a whole bunch of people who Alexander the Great is, or if they've known the name Alexander the Great, or if they heard the name before, they will have said yes, even in 2021. It's one of the reasons that I can still cover this on a podcast, and people will be hopefully engaged by it at least. You see Alexander is a figure studied throughout history still today, because of this mythology that surrounded him, partially because of his campaign against the Persians, right? This sort of unstoppable force, that's sort of what he was building up to at this point. He hadn't ever lost, and at one point before this campaign sort of kicked off, the Persian king Darius had this reputation himself. He had this reputation as an unstoppable military force who would never lose. And a lot of Persian kings before him had this. Xerxes as well had this about 100 years ago. He had this, and a lot of, again, it was a big deal for the Persians. Is this like, hey, we've never lost a battle when our king is present, and now we've lost two. This really shattered their image and their confidence, right? A lot of battles are about confidence, right? If you're confident that your soldiers will win, then if they're fighting with confidence and they're fighting with good morale, then they're more likely to fight harder and compete on a higher level, and honestly, they're more likely to win, because if you can weaken your enemy's confidence, then you're more likely to win as well. And this is sort of what was happening in the Persian Empire. Alexander wasn't just a dominant military commander, and he didn't just win because of his prowess as a commander, although he was an extremely talented military commander. Part of it was genuinely because the Persian confidence was shot. Again, their confidence was really, really tied into this idea of them having this unstoppable king that they sort of like. It's sort of like having genuinely having this era or aura of invincibility, and then having it taken away from you and it being put on Alexander. And Alexander's men sort of had this innate trust in him that he would always win. Right, and they fought like they knew they were going to win because they had him, and he was in charge, and they knew they were going to win because of it. And this is what was such a big deal for Darius, and why while yes, fleeing the city of Persepolis was a good idea, and sort of fleeing rather than being besieged and being captured initially was a good idea. Why it was such a devastating blow to lose their capital, because it was another symbol of their power and another symbol of their empire that had now just fallen. Alexander realizes, okay, I need to capture this man, because while yes, their confidence is low, if he's able to build up an army, and he does have a pretty significant force with him at this point when he does leave the capital, then they could cause me serious problems. So Alexander decides, okay, I'm going to flee, or I'm going to pursue Darius and actually try and do something about this, rather than doing the what I think is the sort of smarter thing with the benefit of hindsight, and sort of managing the day-to-day affairs of his empire. And this is one of the things that I'll get into in a later podcast, but that's one of the reasons that Alexander's empire didn't last beyond him, and that it fractured when he left, or when he passed away, because he genuinely didn't, like, while he did pay important attention to the side of, the logistical side of running an army, he didn't really pay attention to the logistical side of ruling an empire, not capturing or conquering one, but ruling one. So he knew what the logistics in terms of running an army and maintaining your army and feeding your army and doing all of the sort of the logistical side of that was, and he paid. And one of the reasons he was such a successful military commander was because he was able to pay attention to those things. But genuinely, he didn't set up a succession plan, right? I mean, and that was one of the reasons his empire eventually did fall apart. But for now, we're focused on him capturing Darius. So I think, with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been better if he'd sort of stayed around to stabilize the empire a little bit, sort of rested on his laurels a little bit. But again, I see why he did go after Darius, and then he pursued Darius all over the eastern part of the Achaemenid Empire and into the province of Bactria, where Darius was betrayed by the Persian satrap Bessus. Bessus was put in a tough position here, and like I was just mentioning, that confidence that the Persians had in their king was now destroyed, and a lot of them were losing confidence in not just this idea of our king is invincible, we're going to win, but also Darius' ability as a military commander. And Bessus was thinking, okay, what am I going to do? Because Alexander has this reputation of both brutality and being merciful, right? He has this. He can be extremely brutal and ruthless and merciless when he has to be, but he can also be relatively merciful, as we talked about in several episodes in this season. He has actually let commanders that he fought against on the battlefield, people who have actively tried to kill him, remain in power under him once they've sworn their allegiance. So if we, so he is merciful to some extent. He's not just killing anyone for no reason. And I do talk about the fact he didn't have a succession plan, but he did sort of understand that, he was ruling over a conquered people, and that he would need people in charge of the area who knew what they were doing and knew the area well. And that's part of the reason why he kept a lot of them alive. A lot of the Persian satraps alive if they surrendered to him, or even if they had previously fought him on the battlefield. Misias is the one that comes to mind for this as well. But Bessus is has this decision to make. Okay, what do I do here? What do I do with this? What do I do here? Because on one hand, I have my king, the king I'm supposed to be swearing allegiance to, come to me and say, "Hey, I'm going to fight back, and we're going to win, and we're going to take the empire." And on the other hand, which is great, and if we win, then awesome, we win. But if we lose, then what do we do? And we know that Alexander will kill us and put my people to the sword, and he will actively harm not just the satraps and the governors and the people in charge, but he will genuinely put populations to the sword, and he will have no qualms about doing that. So Bessus does what he thinks is best for his people, and he captures Darius and betrays him. And then he tries to negotiate with Alexander, and he sends him some letters and envoys, and says, "Hey, I've captured Darius for you. Come find him or come take him and sort of leave me alone. And you have Darius, which I know you want, and you can do whatever you want with him. And you can just leave my province of Bactria alone, and we'll be like our own separate kingdom." And Alexander, as is his custom, does not respond. He does not do anything. He doesn't even acknowledge that Bessus has sent word of this to him. But now he knows obviously where Darius is, and he doesn't respond, but he continues to march on Bactria, and march into Bactria and on Bessus's capital. And eventually Bessus sort of realizes that he's made a grave sort of mistake here, and he's gone, "Oh shit, like what am I going to do? I've made a terrible, he's made a bad judgment call," right? Because what he could have done was, "Hey, I've captured the Persian king, and also I'm surrendering to you and remain in the governorship of the province of Bactria." But he declared himself the king of Bactria, as in that Bactria was a different kingdom than the rest of the Achaemenid Empire, and Alexander wanted the whole empire under his control. He didn't want to have especially a powerful Persian lord sort of like right next to him there, who could sort of cause him serious problems in the future, right? He didn't want to have this a serious problem here, like where he didn't want to have any sort of future conflicts on his hands. He was intending to rule over the empire eventually, once it was fully conquered. And he knew that if he left Bactria alone, eventually there could be some consequences regarding this, and there could be some sort of revolt if he were to leave Bactria alone. So again, Alexander shows this reputation for both possible mercifulness and then and also has this sort of lack of mercy, if you will. He definitely does have a brutal side to him as well, and does not respond. And eventually Bessus is sort of like, okay, what am I going to do? And eventually he actually ends up stabbing Darius and just leaving him for dead, which is genuinely one of the most disrespectful things that he can do. In fact, Alexander himself finds this disrespectful, and when he finds Darius's body, he sends him back to Persepolis to be buried with honor and with dignity, as the Persian kings that came before him were buried. He genuinely treats Darius. He treats Darius with respect, and that's the thing, is Alexander always respected Darius. He always respected his opponents, and if you were a worthy opponent for him, then yeah, he respected you. He didn't have any qualms about killing you, but he would have. There was an honor, there was a respect, there was a mutual. All right, we're gonna treat each other with respect here. We're gonna that Bessus sort of just undermines, and this is a huge, like a really, really, really bad move for Bessus. Not just necessarily the betrayal of his king, but the way he just leaves Darius for dead genuinely causes serious issues, because eventually he flees Bactria and the rest of the province sort of surrenders to Alexander, because of course, why wouldn't they? And Alexander pursues him, but he also says to the Persians, hey, this guy killed your king, right? This guy killed your king without honor, right? The Persians, even the Persians that were already serving under him, who understood that Alexander was probably going to kill Darius at some point, Alexander always said, like, I will, like, it's going to be honorable, right? This will be an honorable death, right? It will be either honor death in combat, or it'll be like he will be treated with honor in his death, and he wasn't. And in fact, Darius's brother sides with Alexander, and Alexander says, we're going to go after Bessus, and we're going to fight, and we're going to subdue the rest of the provinces, but also we're going to bring revenge upon the guy who killed your king in such a disrespectful manner. And a lot of the Persians are very, very both surprised by this and then also happy about this, because they decide to follow Alexander. A lot of the Macedonians are very much like, oh, what are we going to do? Because they're sort of tentative about fighting alongside a force of Persians, force of recently conquered Persians, but the Persians are now fully behind Alexander, because they know that he would have treated Darius with respect, and he always did. And that's the other thing, is Alexander put a lot of people to the sword, and he does have this brutal reputation, but he was respectful of the people that he was ruling over. He never disrespected their customs, or while he did think of himself as be above them, he sort of always had this like respect for other people's customs, and he allowed them to keep many of their customs while he conquered them. Which is again another reason why the Persians fought alongside him here. And eventually, Alexander follows Bessus to the north, and pursues him. And eventually Bessus is captured and killed, and his remains are sent back to Darius's brother, who takes him back to Bactria, and to the site of where Darius is murdered. In fact, Alexander, and this is the brutal reputation we're talking about, he actually ends up cutting off Bessus's ears and his nose before returning him to Darius's brother. And again, this is the symbolism here, right, where he genuinely has this again, it's that has religious symbolism in the afterlife. That has religious symbolism for both the Greeks and the Persians. And then Bessus is eventually crucified by Darius's brother. Alexander continues his march north, subduing the final provinces of the Persian Empire, and then eventually runs across this nomadic tribe called the Saga, right? And the Saga realize that if they defeat the Macedonians, the Persian kingdom is now weakened, and if they defeat the Macedonians, they will be able to raid the province basically in perpetuity and without repercussion. Pretty much, they will be able to raid this province and become a wealthy tribe. They're a nomadic tribe that sort of occupy the land just north of the most northern province of the Persian Empire. And so they set up across on the northern bank of the Jaxartes River, stopping Alexander's advance. And Alexander realizes that they could be a major threat for him and his empire as well. They could, constantly sort of be a threat if he doesn't deal with them right away. So Alexander wants to make sure that they are dealt with, and he really wanted to sort of get rid of any sort of threat to his empire and to his rule, which is why it was so imperative initially that he capture Darius and he deal with Darius in that way, because genuinely it mattered. It mattered to him. It mattered to the rest of the Macedonians. Like he understood that he was ruling over conquered territory and that he was ruling over hostile land. These people were not yet, while they had sworn fealty to him, they were not yet fully loyal to him. And in fact, the Saga could help the captured Persians turn on the Macedonians if they were so politically inclined. And so he realized that there was a major threat here. And there were about 15,000 Saga on the other side of this river. So Alexander actually ended up building a city called Alexander. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, but it's Alexandria Eschate, which basically translates to English as the furthest Alexandria, basically meaning that, okay, this is the furthest part of our empire here. It's like the furthest away from the empire, that like this like the last city in the empire, pretty much. And he realizes that like this could be, so while they're building the city, right, because Alexander is worried about the Saga are bombarding the city with arrows from their mounted archers across the river, and it's sort of having a minor effect, but not really. And in fact, Alexander builds the city walls in about 17 days, so they were high enough that they couldn't be hit with arrow fire anymore. And then he orders them to cross the river. He orders his soldiers to cross the river, and he does so, in such a sort of not necessarily again, this is where the Saga got it wrong. While their strategy was a good one, right? We're gonna bombard the Macedonians as they cross, and we're gonna hit them while they're in transit. Okay, good idea initially, right? Good idea. They're gonna be on the water. It's gonna be hard for them to fire back at us. So we're gonna fight. We're gonna try and take out as many of the numbers as we can. And Alexander realizes this, and like I said, he's one of the most sound, military tacticians of pretty much all time, especially throughout ancient history. And he realizes, hey, I have artillery, I have catapults, and they can actually do serious damage across the river because of the range that they had. And they can do serious damage across the river here. So he sets up all of his archers in a line and all of his soldiers. He orders everyone to cross at once, so that it was a harder. There were more of his soldiers for the Saga to aim at, so they didn't know who to take out necessarily, and so that his archers could sort of fire back because they were protected a little bit. And he also ordered his cavalry to begin firing and sort of send in advanced volleys. If any of you have ever studied World War I, and World War II, this is sort of what tactic that they would use, is they'd have their artillery firing as the army advanced, sort of giving the army cover fire to cover their advance. And that's what this is the first sort of use of this tactic. And Alexander sort of invents this tactic here, or first recorded use of this tactic, I should say. And Alexander invents this tactic here for this battle. He very much says, okay, what are my advantages here, right? Because he's in sort of a disadvantaged position. He's lost about half his force, either subduing satraps and guarding them, or subduing other provinces and guarding other provinces. or just because of the death of traveling through the desert and the lack of resources that he had at this point. And not through a lack of logistical know-how, but just genuinely because it was tough weather, and they just lost. They ended up losing a lot of their force because of that. So he has about 25,000 men of the initial 50,000 that he had, and the Saga have 15,000, but they're all mounted archers, so they're an extremely mobile force, and they're an extremely they can fight with range, which is something that Alexander doesn't necessarily have. Not Alexander doesn't necessarily have, but something that he doesn't always face, right? Sometimes you're facing an infantry force or a cavalry force, which are mobile, but don't necessarily have the range. But horse archers have the range that they can do damage across the water, for sure. So again, Alexander launches this cavalry, the artillery attack and catapults, and this absolutely decimates the Saga's ranks. It decimates their ranks so it's so devastating to them that they are actually forced to flee from the banks in order to sort of survive. And some of their tribal leaders are actually genuinely mortally wounded because of this, and this allows the Macedonians to cross and land on the other side, on the northern side of the Jaxartes River, without any resistance, really. And it's it's a masterstroke from Alexander here, just absolutely like a masterstroke. And the next thing that he does is he realizes that he needs to, in order to defeat them, he needs to pin them down, right? So he sends forward an advanced force of cavalry, of light cavalry, and basically says, hey, you guys are going to act as bait. He tells them, he specifically says, you guys are going to be as bait, you're going to draw them in, they're going to encircle you, and then we're going to encircle the rest of them and kill them. Again, like I said earlier, talking about this mythical sort of image that both Darius and Alexander had at one point in their military careers. Alexander's men trust him so much and so implicitly that they just do it. You know, they know that they're in huge danger because they know that they're going to be surrounded by people who can attack them from any angle and with range. But they trust Alexander's tactics so much that they're willing to do it. And this is, again, like I was talking about with Bessus and Darius. Bessus doesn't have this loyalty, not necessarily even loyalty, he just doesn't have the confidence that Darius could have pulled off anything like this. And this is what we're talking about in terms of confidence and morale in battle. If you know your commander is going to save you and going to pull you out of this, you're a lot more willing to pull off dangerous and risky maneuvers like this. Like I said, this could have really backfired. This could really have backfired for Alexander, but it ended up not backfiring. It ended up working perfectly, and a lot of the Saga push forward and do surround this force, and then Alexander is able to outflank them and surround them and pin a significant number of them down and kill them. He's able to pin over. He's able to pin over 2,000 Saga, sort of, or not 2,000, but he's able to pin a significant number. In fact, and they ended up. So what happened was that obviously the Saga surrounded this batch of cavalry, this small force of cavalry, and Alexander's main force is sort of held back, and then he sends the rest of his light cavalry on the wings, and they sort of wrap around the Saga, who have now formed a circle around his cavalry. So this cavalry A, I should call them. So cavalry A are encircled, and he sends his cavalry B to encircle the Saga that are forming this tight circle around his cavalry, and they sort of do. And the Saga initially don't realize what's happening because of where they are and what they're focused on. And luckily, they didn't send all of their force, but their leader, the leader of this sort of organization of nomadic tribes here, did go and was there and was eventually captured by Alexander. and killed. And this is why this was so critical for Alexander and his men, was because he was able to pin down a nomadic army and an army of horse archers, and he was able. And in fact, Alexander, once they were sort of sucked into this trap, Alexander charged through the center with his own companion, his heavy cavalry, heavily armored, like I said, with shields and spears. And they were, as I've said in previous episodes, they were like some of the greatest cavalry that existed during this time period, except for possibly either the Persians or the Nubian cavalry, who, if people want, we can cover it at some point in an episode of this podcast as well. So it was a massive. This was a massive victory for Alexander, because he was able to basically wipe out the entire leadership of these tribes, and sort of solidify sort of peace for his empire at this point. They were actually able to kill over 1,200. Saga were just absolutely butchered at this battle. And when I talk about this, I feel like I have to mention this. When we talk about history and we talk about the lives lost, I have a passion for history. I have passion for knowledge and for history and for like studying history and now with the podcast, reporting back what has happened in history. But history is brutal and sad, and like 1,200 people just lost their lives, and we have to really acknowledge that. But this was a great, when I say this was like excellent, this was a great military strategy and great military victory for Alexander. It wasn't excellent that these people had lost their lives by any stretch of the imagination. And as a historian, our job is to report the facts, not to sort of, regardless of how brutal they might be. But I just wanted to clarify that sometimes I talk about this with such passion, and I say things that may come across as I don't understand. Like, you know what I mean? When we're studying history, it can just be numbers. 1,200 people were killed and another 150 were taken prisoner, and that's just at the Battle of the Jaxartes River here. But again, I'm just reporting the facts. I'm not saying that there are no good guys in history. There are no good guys in history, because when you're studying history like this, you're not, at least I hope, people aren't necessarily, when you're, especially ancient history, you're not, we're so far removed from it that we're not necessarily, we sometimes don't realize that these were genuinely real people that had lives and goals and aspirations and whatnot. But genuinely, so I just want to make it clear that I'm just reporting on what has happened because I have a passion for history and I find it fascinating almost. History, not just, and military history, I find fascinating. And, this is one of those battles in history that just ends in such a brutal fashion, where these people are just surrounded and just executed with no mercy. And like I was talking about Alexander's reputation for both being merciful and not, this is a time where he was trying to send a message to the remaining members of the Saga tribe and say, look, don't challenge here. Go away. Go somewhere else. This is him sending an absolute message and making sure that his borders were secure. That's what he was doing here. It wasn't necessarily just, and for Alexander, it wasn't about, oh, I'm going to kill all these people, it's going to be awesome. It's, I'm sending a message so that my people are safe and my empire and my power and my prestige are protected here. Anytime he acts brutally, it's not, at least from what I've read in my studies, although I'm not fully read on all of history and all of Alexander for sure, not yet anyway. We'll get to that later in the season, but genuinely, he sort of, it's all about sort of this image of protecting this image of a powerful, strong leader, and that's why the Battle of Jaxartes River was so critical here for him, because he was able, everything that has happened both leading up to it, with the capture and then killing of Darius and then Bessus as well, and then the subduing of the provinces, who had then at this point surrendered to him because he's a stabilizing influence, not just necessarily a conquering one, but he's stable, and he knows, and the people are like, okay, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't have a king. We don't have we don't have anything, right? Because once Bessus has been killed, the sort of entire region of the empire is thrown into chaos, and Alexander is this stabilizing force who says, all right, I'm going to come in, I'm going to control everything, but you guys are going to run it, and you're going to run it under me, and it's going to, like, just, you know what I mean? He takes over this power vacuum that Bessus creates by killing Darius, and Alexander at the Battle of Jaxartes River, his goal is to stabilize his empire, and part of doing that is by stabilizing its border and making sure that it can't be raided by the Saga tribes, and that's why this battle is so fascinating and such a huge victory, because this is the first time. This is the first time in over 11 years, and that it doesn't happen very often, even in combat, that a Greek force, Macedonian or otherwise, had subdued a nomadic mobile army such as this before. In fact, the last time this had happened was in 340 BC with Philip II of Macedon, Alexander's father. So that's why this was such a big deal. Was, again, it helped perpetuate this image of Alexander as this military commander, right? As this invincible force, especially because his men, who he had sent forward to sort of entrap the Saga, he just, like, they were able to, most of them anyway, were able to survive, which meant that Alexander was right to do it, and they sort of, again, their morale got boosted. Every single stage along the way, their morale was increased, and they were becoming more and more loyal because they had this confidence that Alexander would be there and he would save them, and that he would, be there. He would make sure that they got out alive pretty much in every battle, and that they would win. And again, this is part of why Alexander was such a feared and amazing military commander, was because of this confidence that his men had in him and that he had in himself. And that's the thing. Alexander had more confidence in himself than anyone else had in him. He knew that he was going to do it, and that he was going to be successful, and that he was going to be that he was going to win, and he believed in himself, which allowed his men to believe in him. It's one of those things where, like, if you believe in yourself, then other people will believe in you too. And he certainly definitely believed in himself and his own ability, and the ability of his men, for sure. Again, and that's what this campaign is really about, is the belief. And you can see it turns on the belief, right? The Saga initially believed that they were going to be able to crush the Macedonians as they tried to cross the river, and then Alexander pulls out a brilliant move of the artillery, and then they fall apart, and their leader is killed, and they fall apart. Because they don't have the belief anymore. And that's what battles like this are all about, ancient history especially. Battles are all about confidence and belief and morale. And if you don't have it, then you're going to lose, regardless of whether or not your force is technically better trained, or technically more well-trained, or, or anything, has better equipment, or more well-fed, or had been able to get better rest, or whatever. If you don't have morale and confidence, then it almost doesn't matter what the other force is able to do. Even if you have the greater number, you will probably lose, or at least you will lose a significant portion of your army, even if you do win. When we talk about the Romans, and specifically Julius Caesar, again, I like to compare Alexander and Caesar because they are both two of the greatest military minds of the ancient world. When we talk about the Romans, we'll talk about this idea again of, if you have a great commander who you believe in, and who the soldiers believe in, you can pretty much win any battle. I'll talk about this because this happens a lot. Says Caesar, especially at Alesia. If any of you have ever heard of the Battle of Alesia, then I can't wait to cover that on this podcast. That's one of my favorite military battles of all time, just because of what happens there. I won't get into spoilers for that episode, but it's one of the most epic battles of ancient history, in my personal opinion. Anyway, that has been this week's episode on the Battle of the Jaxartes River and everything that happened leading up to it. And again, this sort of led Alexander to now be fully in control of the Achaemenid Empire and the undisputed king of Persia. Anyway, so that's this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, apologies for not getting an episode out last week, but we are back to our regular schedule, so we should have episodes available every Sunday from now on. And season one is on Alexander the Great, so it will cover his Persian campaign and the rest of his military campaign, and also then possibly even a few more sort of miscellaneous episodes, including sort of some funny historical anecdotes about him that aren't covered in military history necessarily. And then after that, as I said, if you follow at Navigating History on Instagram, there will be some polls. There will be a poll there where you guys can vote on which topic you want me to do for season 2. And then I'll do whatever topic gets the most votes. Basically, the poll will be up for 24 hours, and whoever gets the most votes after 24 hours, that's who wins. But again, if you're listening to this for the first time, or if this is the first episode you've listened to, so thank you very much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, or listening, if you're listening on any of the audio platforms, follow at Navigating History on Instagram, at Navigating_History on TikTok, and again, that's where we post any content updates or any polls or any Q&A questions that might be coming out in the future as well. We're working on a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes here. So like I said, this is, my first time ever doing stuff like this. So we're sort of getting everything up to speed. But thank you again very much for watching and listening to this episode. Again, follow on Instagram and on TikTok as well. And bye for now.